Gone are the days where we wanted to see how much we could possibly cram on our plate and the glorification of doing it all. I have seen in my practice, I work with women all over the world, all different ages and different careers. But one of the themes that has come up universally in the past year or two has really been this great desire to simplify. And I work with a lot of female entrepreneurs as well. And so, both simplifying in their business and what their focus is and what they're putting their time into work wise to deliver whatever outcomes they're desiring. And as well as in general, with my sacred structure work, we really look at your entire schedule, all the different facets of your life, and we look at your human design and your astrology, and we see how does that energetically align with how you're living and working and scheduling your life right now, and what tweaks can we make to get them back into alignment. But across the board, no matter what your human design energy type is, no matter what your astrological signs are, I have just heard over and over and over again this deep desire to simplify. We all want less on our plate so that we can enjoy everything that is on our plate more. And I think it's really beautiful that so many of us are coming around to this, but I know from myself as well as from my clients that it's a lot easier to say, well, I just want to simplify things. Well, I just, I don't want to be doing as much. I need to release some things from my schedule. I need to realign things, right? And then actually going in and doing it can feel so overwhelming and so daunting, because it's almost like we don't even know where to begin. And we've gotten so used to juggling all of these things that we don't even realize it, but we're constantly making excuses for why we can't get rid of them, why we can't release them. And so I thought, why not? I was actually thinking about this a lot after this new moon in Libra, and I'm in Copenhagen right now, coming at you live from Denmark, consistently one of the top 5 happiest countries. And we were on a bike ride the other day, biking around Copenhagen on this beautiful 3-hour private tour. And one of the things our guide told us was how the Danish have an 8-8-8 rule. And that means 8 hours working, 8 hours sleeping, and 8 hours with your family and friends. And the coolest thing about that is that he said that they're actually so serious about that 8-8-8 that if you're working a job and you're trying to work longer than 8 hours, you're trying to come in early or stay late, whereas in the US, you'd probably be celebrated, you probably would be promoted. In Denmark, your boss will actually call you into the office and ask you what's going on. They're going to ask you, do you feel like you're not competent enough to do your job in 8 hours? Am I giving you too much to do in 8 hours? Because in Denmark, the mark of a true professional is someone that doesn't need to work more than 8 hours to accomplish whatever tasks they set out for that day. And that really both hit me and my husband hard. What a perspective shift. That if you are truly adept at your job, you can accomplish whatever tasks you need to in that 8-hour window. And that's something that I really relate to, especially as someone, in human design that's a manifestor. And when I'm coaching a lot of different people based on their energy types and their astrology, there are certain people that aren't even made to work 8 hours, right? That aren't meant to kind of sit down and grind like that. However, it doesn't mean that they can't be effective. It doesn't mean that they can't be accomplishing things and efficient and all of that, right? And so I love that perspective of to be truly adept and to be good at prioritizing. That was one of the other things he said. It's not, it's almost like something to be embarrassed of here if you're working more than 8 hours, because culturally they interpret it as you don't have good time management skills. I was like, this is amazing. Like, I mean, it's a little harsh, I guess, but if you think about it, um, you know, it makes so much sense that, oftentimes in the US, you'll see people, and I'm one of these people. I was just writing a chapter for a book that will be published, in another year or so. And I was writing about how early on in my career, I used to wear my busy like a badge of honor. Whenever I was meeting up with someone, or some, I was having like a work colleague, and they were like, "How you doing?" I was like, busy, but it's all good things. Just a lot on my plate, just some really exciting projects, but overwhelmed, right? And it was almost like my busyness made, oh, I'm cool, I'm important, people want things from me, I have lots to do. Um, and I laugh now looking at that, being like, no, just because I was busy doesn't mean I was efficient. And just because someone is working 12 hours doesn't mean they're actually getting more than someone who's efficient and effective in 8 hours. And I think as a whole, we're feeling, especially as women, we juggle so many roles, we juggle so many different things in our lives, so many different facets of our life right now. We want more balanced, holistic lives, right? We want to have this spiritual practice and the friends, and we want to enjoy our home, and maybe we have a hobby, or we want to garden, or we want to paint. We want to have that successful career that makes us feel impactful and on purpose, and earn financially. We want to be good moms and dog moms, cat moms, family members. There's so many aspects of that, and so if we really want to show up for all those areas, we can't be siphoning all of our energy away to any one of those areas. So I wanted to break down with you the process and the questioning and kind of how I would approach this with a client, because like I said, one of the biggest trends I've seen recently with clients that I'm working with is they'll come to me, and one of the very, very, very first things we work on is, how do I simplify my schedule, and how do I simplify, streamline, and focus my work? Because we want to feel more flow, we want to feel more peace. We don't want to surrender our ambitions or our desires, but we don't want to sacrifice the juice of every other facet of our lives for that professional sector. So the first thing that we have to do is take an inventory of everything that's on your plate right now. So if you just want to do this for your career, then I want you to write everything career-wise. If you want to do this for your whole schedule, then write everything that's on your schedule. And this is really important because a lot of us kind of unconsciously group things or don't count things. And that's why I'm a big fan of, especially when we're doing schedule work, literally putting everything on your calendar. Whatever calendar you use, if you're a Google Calendar person, if you're a date book person where you write it out, literally writing out everything so that you truly see where your time is going and how effectively you're using it in alignment with your priorities. So, for instance, a lot of times what happens is, we'll be doing this work around career, and I'm break down the aspects of your career. Whether you run your own business or you work in an office, and you have, an employer, we all have multifacets to our work, right? I feel like it's very rare nowadays that someone has like just like one thing they do, right? They have, maybe part of your work is answering emails, and part of your work is showing up to Zoom calls, and part of your work is, looking over some documents, and part of your work is giving presentations or whatever. Write all this down. For a lot of the women that are entrepreneurs that I work with, I'm like, write every single aspect. So your work, even let's say like your primary thing that you do would be like coaching, or maybe you give facials, or maybe you sell candles or whatever product, right? I want you to not just write that. I want you to really dissect what is every little bit of that, because there's so much we can think like, oh, but I've already simplified it a lot, right? And there is the simplification, especially in business, of being really clear on your audience, being really clear on your offer and what you handle. But then it's also looking at all the different aspects. Nowadays, that I was doing this for myself, so I'll use myself as an example. Writing down, okay, well, I have my Substack, right? Writing my Substack once a week. I have my YouTube channel, so that's recording a video for YouTube once a week. I have my podcast, so that's either an interview or recording a solo cast every week. And then I also want to put the upload times for both of those things, right? So there's the time, let's say it takes me an hour to record the video or the podcast, and then there's at least another 20 minutes where I'm uploading it, if I'm editing, if I'm creating a thumbnail, if I'm writing out the description, adding links. It's important to log all of that, because what happens is we actually have a more negative experience of that task when we underestimate the time it's going to take us. So if in my head I'm saying, well, I just have to record a podcast once a week, and I think that's the only energetic burden of the podcast, I'm lying to myself, because it's not just recording it. It's time that might go into scheduling it or emailing with people to schedule it. It's time that might go into me brainstorming about topics for what I'm going to talk about, even if it's a solo cast. It's time that goes into me doing the intro and outro and thumbnails and writing the description. And so when we put all that together, maybe instead of 1 hour a week, it ends up being 3 hours a week. But if we're budgeting 1 hour and it's costing us 3 hours, then we're never going to feel like, we're on track. And we actually feel a larger energetic burden around that task, because we haven't appropriately scheduled that time into our calendar. And also, when we're, as a business owner, when you're looking to simplify, you want to know the reality of the time you're putting into a thing, because when you're factoring that into maybe what you need to cut or what you need to shift, knowing the realistic, all-inclusive time really is going to help. Because, for instance, I know a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with social media, with Instagram and TikTok, Threads. And that's one of those very tricky things that kind of falls into that same bucket, where oftentimes we say to ourselves, wow, I'm really, just, it takes me 5 minutes to literally put a reel together and click post, but you're not taking into account the amount of time it may have took you to figure out what reel you were going to take, or do all of that, record that footage at some point. The amount of research you might take to look up what kind of reels you want to do or what you want to talk about, the scheduling of social media, the amount of, when you think about that, you're like, well, if I'm going to strategically and intentionally post on social media for my business every day, then I'm probably either going to need a bulk amount of time, maybe 4 or 5 hours on a Monday, or, 1 day a week to kind of get it all done for the week, or I'm going to need a solid hour every day to be able to think of a new idea, record some content, edit it, write it out or whatnot. Maybe an hour is a little bit more depending on what kind of content you do. But it's really being honest about that. Okay, social media is not, even though it feels like sometimes we can post things in a flash and it's boom, 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 doesn't take that much time. We want to look at the accurate amount of time. And so really breaking down all those aspects. If you have a business that runs on some sort of a website or a scheduling platform or a payment platform, how much time do you have to invest in like updating that or fixing it or zhuzhing it or whatnot? And that might depend on like where you are in your business. So if you're someone that's thinking like, do I want to take on this new thing? Let's look at all the things that it would require and how much time that would take. Is it going to take you, sometimes in our head we think, oh, well, it takes me nothing to like launch a new offer, a new session type or whatnot. But then when we really think about that, well, no, because it's going to take me at least 4 to 5 hours to write up a good description page and then maybe another hour to figure out like the scheduling and payment processing and all of that and embed that in as well. And then maybe another couple hours if I'm going to plan out a content strategy to share more about it. And then maybe another couple hours if I'm going to write up a newsletter to share, with my people about it. So things actually can take up way more time than we see. And so I think the first thing to do is look at everything that you have going on. Be incredibly detailed and specific. So if you're doing this for your whole life, that means write down. If you're doing the dishes or putting the dishes away every day, log that in because that's a thing that's going to take up some of your time every day. If, for me, before my son wakes up, I'm getting all of his stuff together. I'm making sure his breakfast is ready. I'm making sure that I have, his clothes out and, I'm making sure that I'm dressed, all the things. I'm doing things. So it's not like I really have like a free hour or a free 30 minutes before he wakes up. That's accounted for. And so it's important for us to look at that because as we're looking to simplify, we want to be able to see the full picture. Because some of those things might be, some of the trade-offs or whatnot might be, okay, well, if it takes me X amount of time in the morning to get all that stuff ready for my son, but the morning is actually like a more creative time for me or a time where I'm can blast through emails really fast, whereas like 9 o'clock at night before I go to bed isn't. Maybe, what if I can do as much to prep all of that at 9 a.m.? So maybe I just need to turn on the toaster or put hot water in his oatmeal or whatever it is, but everything's pretty much out. And then I can get that hour back to answer emails or write, something for my substack because that's my more creative time. So that's why it's so important before you ask yourself some of the questions we're going to go through is to really look at all the different ways you're utilizing your time. Because when we're thinking about simplifying, a lot of the things that you're bleeding energy and time on are things that maybe don't always get a full calendar block on your schedule, right? And when we notice that, when we're like, oh, actually, like, this is totally me. I'll put myself out here for this. I never put food shopping on my calendar. And I food shop all the time, but it's never on my calendar. And so it will just eat away, 30 minutes from this day, maybe an hour from that day if it's been a bit for, and I need to go to a farther supermarket or whatnot. And if we're not accounting for that, then we can't even see the opportunity there to be like, you know what, I'm actually going to order Whole Foods delivery of most of my groceries and then just save some produce and stuff for when I go to the farmer's market because I'm wasting 3 hours a week going to different grocery stores. And I would rather have that spaciousness with my son, with my writing, anything almost, right? Than being at grocery stores. And so that's why it's important before we do any of this to write out all the things, whether it's your business or your life. And then next, you want to ask yourself, what are your priorities in this season of life or this season of business, depending on what you're doing this for. So if your priority in this season of life is to spend more time with your kids or spend more time with your spouse, then you might pull back on some of the work things or pull back on some, miscellaneous things that don't connect with that, or look for ways to incorporate your spouse or your kids in whatever errands you have to do. So you're aligning with that. When it comes to your business, it is asking yourself, am I in a growth season? Am I in a maintenance season? What are the things that are important to me business-wise to see progress in? And even ordering them, if you're like, Cass, I want more. I want to grow my audience. I want to make more money. I want to come out with new classes or whatever it is. It's prioritizing them and saying, okay, well, and this is another, we'll just dive into it because this is a good transition point to like ask these big questions that I think can be real clarifiers for you. So in this case, I think the question to ask would be, what is the one thing that will support the other things the most, right? And so this could go two ways, like for instance in business, right? It could be, well, I don't have an audience at all. So me being consistent about growing an audience, establishing a brand, setting up my shop, so to speak, that it's pertinent for that to be the priority, so that when I get to the place to share my offer, there are people that already know me, have already associated me with what I'm doing, and then I can now, turn the faucet on more, focusing on how do I, keep growing and keep selling and hit more income targets. But it's good for us to know, okay, if I skip to, let's say, one thing, and then, so if you're so focused on, let's say, hitting a certain number, that you're willing to not like cohesively grow your brand or, really like honor your brand vision for the sake of just trying to do whatever makes money fast. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just about owning like, what is my greater truth? What feels really good to me, right? And so looking at how can these priorities work together, right? So how can I build my audience in a way that's also going to organically build my customer base, right? But the focus would be on building the audience, and the tasks that come more with building the audience, like, consistent sharing on social media, community engagement, looking up best practices, etc. But also in the mindset, knowing like, okay, this is going to support and build that next, this next level. And similarly in the rest of your life, asking, well, what is the one or two things that make the rest of my life flow better? So for me, this is like a no-brainer. Meditation and exercise. If I don't have those two going on, nothing else really works well. And so what are those things that are giving you the maximum ROI? What are the things that are making everything else that you put on top of them more expansive and easier? And so in your life, that might be making sure you get 8 hours of sleep. I'm sure that's a big one for a lot of us. It could be, like I said, your exercise, your spiritual practice. It could be, making that cup of coffee and reading the newspaper in the morning, right? It's like, what are those anchors for you that then anything you put on top of it is going to benefit from that anchor? And it's a really good way of looking at your prioritization of your schedule, right? Because sometimes it's easy to skip the gym, or it's easy to, sacrifice, the 5 minutes in the morning with your coffee and your newspaper or whatnot, or your meditation, But when we really acknowledge it as this is a building block upon which everything else I'm going to put on top of it is going to benefit from, then you think twice before, cutting that off your list, right? And so similarly, like we were talking about with work, oftentimes there's also those building blocks in our work life, and they'll be different for anyone, right? But if you also look at that, okay, is there one or two things that I do for my career that helps everything else move better, right? And so it could be something like, well, having a 15-minute chat with my assistant every morning to get on the same page gets everything done faster. It could be, investing in having lunch with my boss once a week so that we're on the same page and we have a good relational rapport makes the rest of my job easier because I feel like I can come to them with, ideas or questions or whatever, right? And so we got our first thing. So first we want to write out all the things, what everything is on your plate. And then two, we want to look at, out of those things, what are the things that make everything on top of them better? What expands your capacity and yeah, blesses up, right? So the other questions I think that are really interesting that I love to ask are a little bit more abstract and spiritual, I would say, are reflective. And that is and I feel like they go together. Sorry, I'm giving a lot of lead up to this. But I feel like they're really good reflection questions when you're thinking about cutting things. What do I truly admire in others? Who do I look up to? And then the other one is what would I be most proud of? And I love that word proud because I feel like, at least for me, I'll say, I'd love your thoughts on this, but for me, when I think about what I would be most proud of, it's not like what anybody else in my life would be proud of, but what would personally bring me great pride at the end of the day, at the end of my life, as a whole, it puts a little bit of a different perspective on it. It kind of gets us out of that like immediate rush and urgency and gets us more into the headspace of like legacy and purpose and impact and also just like, how do I want to spend this like wild and precious life, right? Instead of just being like, well, I have too much time, I'm frazzled, like what can I cut that's not important, and how can I still make the same amount of money, and how do I get all the things done, and of course, I get all that, and that's things that, you have to factor in. But a great discernment mechanism I find is to really ask myself, of all the things on your plate, what would you be really proud of doing really well, being really successful at? What makes you like stand up a little straighter when you walk into a room? And then even going so far as to being like at the end of my life, or what I often ask myself, right? If, I had a year left to live, what would I be most proud of having done in this year? And maybe that's a little bit morbid. You don't have to go there. Another way you can look at it, like I said, is really, and I like asking this question, like, who do you admire? Who do you look up to? Because oftentimes the people that we admire and the people we look up to are so almost like reflexive, right? We almost sometimes can't put words to it, why we feel drawn to certain people, why we might look up to someone or feel really inspired by someone and then not inspired by another person. And it's really interesting for me when I kind of discovered this like discernment and this kind of thought process, was that there were so many people in my world that I was aware of, let's say, both colleagues and also just, people in the zeitgeist, people that are well known. And there are a tremendous amount of people that I would consider successful. And then I would say, wow, that person is really successful. Wow, that person makes a lot of money. Wow, that person is healthy or beautiful, has a lovely family. But there's only a few that I would truly like. I don't want to say like trade places with, because I wouldn't want to, quote unquote, like I wouldn't want to trade my son or my family or anything like that for this person's life, but like the elements of their life, right? So, so I think that brought a lot of perspective, because when I looked at that, I saw, wow, the people that I admire are not necessarily the industry leaders in certain industries, not necessarily the wealthiest at different things, not necessarily the best online course creators or whatever. And I think it's really good to observe. I think when I looked at that, I really saw some clarity around, I think it shows you who you want to step into and what values you have, right? So, if you have a value around family and marriage and children, like I always have, then for me, it wasn't as inspiring if someone was successful and they never got married or never had children. Now, I totally respect that, people's choices and people's paths. But I think I think what this means, it's not that you don't respect this person. It's not that you don't give kudos to this person in, whatever their success in their life is, right? But it's just about kind of almost noticing kind of what yanks out at you and what doesn't, as a discernment tool for what actually do I want to build with my life, right? And so for me, it was often seeing these multifaceted, multidimensional women that were not just, putting out positive content and inspiring women in certain ways, but they were also creating companies, but they were also fulfilling their own creative passions. They were allowing themselves to paint with so many colors, for lack of a better word, right? And I was only ever drawn to those women as people I admire, because that is just some part of my soul, right? And so that's so interesting, right? It's just interesting to observe. And then furthermore, specifically around that is, women that, had kids, were married, were allowing themselves to have, all of these different things that I wanted. And so I think it's really interesting when you allow yourself to just gather all of those elements and let that inform perhaps some of your next steps, right? And so if there is something that you are doing, especially work-wise, that you look at yourself and say, and I'll never forget, I read this once in a book, and I wish I could place the name of it, but it was a story from a man who was talking about the day he realized that he didn't want what was at the top of the ladder he was climbing. That he didn't want to be his boss. And I think that's a profound moment for anyone. If you look at, whether it's your boss in your organization or whatever the like logical next evolution would be from where you are right now, do I want that? Would that make me proud? Would I be like happy to get there? And if the answer is no, then that's a good indicator that we need to shift our path, right? That we need to actually say, okay, well then what would make me proud? And then again, sometimes then that diverts to the question, well, who does inspire me? Who do I admire? Because often that can bring us clues, right, to where the direction is we want to move. And that can even be in a conversation around, it could be around a conversation around your life balance, right? Like, wow, I notice I really admire people that spend a lot of time with their kids and make their kids dinner and put their kids to bed and whatnot. Okay, that's just good to notice. So can we make that a priority then in your schedule? Wow, I noticed that I really admire podcasters because I just love that they get to express their thoughts and they get to interview cool people that they're interested in questioning. Okay, well, if your main form of content creation up until this point has been, let's say, a blog or Substack or Instagram, even, but you're finding like, okay, being the most successful Instagrammer wouldn't feel as fulfilling. I wouldn't be as proud of versus me being able to walk into a room and saying, I have a successful podcast about X, Y, and Z, right? And I love this test because it's so different for all of us. And there's something I think about just like even visualizing that scenario of like you walking into a room and, someone asking you like, what do you do? Or, how do you spend your day? And you being so proud of whatever your response is. And all of us are going to have different answers to that. But that is a key thing that I would look at when you are allowing yourself to clear out things from your schedule. Because if there is something on your schedule right now where you're like, I'm not going to be, proud to say I was like the number one TikToker or whatever, then, then that might just be a question or something to observe as like, okay, well, that shouldn't be the focus of my energy and attention. That shouldn't get the larger part of the pie. So what am I going to feel proud of if someone asks me how I spent my time, or if it like I'm known for success or an accomplishment in some area? What would I be most proud of? And then also, if you willing to go there with me, asking yourself, on my deathbed, where am I going to be proud that I invested my time? We have this one precious life, and it is a finite amount of time, and hopefully a lot of us have a lot of time left, but even if it is a lot of time, it's still a finite amount of time. And so we get to decide, we get to decide how we divide up this earth energy we have. And again, I don't think it's a black and white, right, wrong answer. I think you could be like, yeah, of course I want to spend time with my friends and my family, but also as someone that has like, a ton of creative energy, every single book I've written has taken a lot of time and a lot of energy from other places in my life. And I have felt that more at peace that when I leave this world, that I have given something that could live on after me. I have done my service in a way that I don't feel about necessarily Instagram, right? I don't know, I don't know what will happen to this podcast or my YouTube or any of that, if I'm not here. But there was something about, having put out physical books in the world, books that have Kindle versions now and all of that stuff, that, I don't know, it gives me peace. And I'm not saying it's logical. People can totally be watching your YouTube or listening to your podcast posthumously after you've passed. But again, this is why it's so fun, because it's like, what is that discernment question to you, right? I'm not right. You're not wrong. You're not right. I'm not wrong. It's just about what is true for us. Someone else might ask that question and say, I don't want to spend any time on work. I just want to spend time with my kids. Someone else might have asked that question and be like, I want to travel to 7 different continents, or I want to run a marathon. But I think it's a great question because it does show you what your soul is calling for, what your soul is going to be proud of at the end of your life. And you know what? That answer might change in each season, and what you get today might not be what you get a year from now. But that's the beauty of being in a spiritual practice, of being in a conversation with your soul, that you will adapt and grow and shift and honor what's coming up for that season of life. So the last thing, because it's already gone way longer than I expected it to go, that I would consider when we're simplifying our schedule and or our career ambitions is, I'm a huge believer. The whole reason I created Divinely Design Your Life was because I wanted to create a manifestation method that didn't need to wait until you had accomplished the big goal, you had manifested the big career change, you had manifested the husband, or manifested the house or the move or whatever. I didn't want you to have to wait until you had manifested that thing to start enjoying your life now, to start consciously creating your life now, because your life is a series of days. And as someone that's accomplished some incredible goals up until this point in my life, I can tell you firsthand that the day that you hit that goal, the day that you hit the milestone, it's exciting, but life continues. And your life is 99% the journey from different milestones and wins and accomplishments and different things in your life. And it's like 1%, those actual like things, right? Those actual wins, those actual manifestations. And so I'm a big believer that if the reason why Divinely Design Your Life and that method works so well at manifesting is because it keeps you happy on the journey. And so whenever I'm coaching someone around, they're starting their business and they're like, oh, I hate Instagram. I don't really like being on camera, so I'm not like a YouTube person, but I'm gonna do it because I know that's how I have to, build my brand and sell, to get clients and stuff. I'm always like, wait, no, hold up. I do not want you doing something every day that you hate, that incites stress and frustration in you, in an effort to accomplish something, thinking that once you accomplish something, you're going to be happy. Because if you're not happy in the doing of it, you're not going to be happy in the whatever success comes with it. I say that all the time, as someone that has what was our 5 books now? 5 books coming out? I don't remember. A lot of books published. I also have a lot of authors that are clients and work with me. And I'm like, you got to figure out how to enjoy your writing time. Because if you're thinking that getting that big publishing deal or, signing on that dotted line for your book is going to make you enjoy writing and make you happy about being an author, you got a long thing coming for you. Because if you're not enjoying the writing process when no one's paying you, when no one's giving you a deadline, when there's no pressure, you're not going to enjoy it just because you got a big fat book deal. And I think so much of life is like that. You have to find a sustainable way to enjoy the process. So when we're thinking of simplifying, I always think, what are the things? There are so many different ways to any goal. There are so many different ways to accomplish the same end. And whether that's personally or business-wise, right? Personally, it's like, okay, I want to have more quality time with my kids. And maybe you absolutely hate taking them to these like kiddie gyms or whatnot. And you're like, but that's like what all the moms do, right? They go to these kiddie gyms, right? And you're not happy with it. Well, then that's not really going to give you the kind of connection you want with your kids or the fun time with your kids. You have to do something that you enjoy, that feels aligned. So sometimes I bring my son to the nature preserve and we go on a hike and we connect that way because we're both enjoying that, right? And there are ways in every of the facets, right? You want to be healthier, you want to be more fit. Well, you can find healthy foods in a variety of, food preferences and styles. You can find, there's so many different ways you can exercise, move your body, sweat, have, get good endorphins. Find the exercise that works for you, because if you find the thing that you enjoy, you're so much more likely to stick to it. Same thing goes with your business. I had a client a few months ago starting her coaching business, and had that same conversation around a lot of the social media things that were draining for her, that didn't feel aligned. But she loved writing, and I was like, well, what about Substack, right? What if you double down on Substack, ignore all the other things, and right now just allow that to be your vehicle and your machine? Because the thing is, if you actually, whether it's that, or it's YouTube, or it's the podcast, right? Or it is Instagram, or it is TikTok, right? Whatever the thing that you enjoy the most, doubling down on that is going to bring you the most blessings, right? Because one, you have your magnetism going, you're happy, you're vibing, you're enjoying yourself. It's going to give you longevity, because you can do something you enjoy longer without seeing results than you're going to be able to do something that you don't enjoy, right? And then also the fact that you're enjoying it is going to make you better at it. It's going to make you want to research the best practices. It's going to make you, enjoy time doing whatever it is, right? And so I think that is, even like I said, even going back to that other example, right? If your goal is just, I want to spend more time with my kids, or more quality time with my kids or kid, whatever, allowing yourself to find a vehicle that you enjoy, that feels good on the journey, is going to facilitate you wanting to do more of that, right? Once I started going to the nature preserve with my son, I was like, wow, this is so nice. Like, he loves exploring. My nervous system is relaxing. We're having a beautiful time in the afternoon during a time that's usually like a cranky time for him. And so then I naturally was like, oh, I got to look up other trails. I got to look up other places we can hike around the area, And so it naturally builds momentum, and it feels more effortless momentum, because your natural joy and your natural interests are in the way. And that's the same thing how it goes. When I first started doing YouTube and Instagram, I was lit up just by, I was making food, I was sharing recipes, I was sharing, healthy living tips, body love tips, like eons ago, right? And it naturally flowed. It didn't feel so heavy. It didn't feel so stressful, because I was actually doubling down on the things I love. And then I'll just lastly end with, I think one of the biggest blocks that comes with simplifying is that we can get stuck in fear that something bad is going to happen, or someone's going to think something bad of us if we eliminate something on our plate, right? Like, if I just stop posting on Instagram for a month, like, what's going to happen? Well, for a lot of those questions, the answer is nothing's going to happen. And if you really want in a month or 2 months or 6 months to kick that up again, it'll be left right where you're waiting for it, right? And if you're like, okay, I was really getting into the habit of, doing the PTA at school or whatever it is. But I think when I'm looking at my schedule, just to simplify and add some spaciousness, I'm going to have to step down from that. Okay, well, step down from that. And again, like, if things shift and you want to get back in, you can re-enter. I think sometimes we can get very cataclysmic with, oh my God, what's going to happen if I drop the ball on this one thing? And if it's helpful for you, sometimes what I find with clients is having that like finite amount of time, saying, okay, I'm going to take a 30-day break from Instagram and TikTok and Facebook or whatever, and just focus on my YouTube, or just focus on my podcast, or whatever it is. I'm going to take a break, and I'm just going to test it out for like 30 days. Okay, if you're like, for 30 days, I'm just going to email, the PTA person and say, for the month of October, I just want to give you a heads up, like things are really busy with us and I just need to take a break to whatever. I don't even know. I've never been to the PTA, but you get it. Any sort of like extra kind of obligation that you're like, maybe this isn't the best thing. I just talked to, another one of my clients, and she was running around her daughter to all these different classes. And I was like, you're feeling so fried. And at the end of the day, and her daughter was actually like just wanting to spend time with her anyway. I was like, what if you just tell your daughter, can you pick your favorite out of all the classes? Or would you rather we just have like a mommy and, me date, and we go to the park, we get ice cream, or we do something special, right? For quality time, because that's why we're doing so much, right? Especially when it's for people we love. We do it because we want them to feel good. We want them to feel loved. But oftentimes there's something that's even more aligned, maybe less time consuming, that can deliver that same result. So I feel like this was a lot to throw at you and ended up being a lot longer than I thought. But if you're like me and a lot of my clients, and stewing on that question of how do I simplify? How do I get more spaciousness in my schedule? I hope that this kind of opened up some thought and some reflection on what might need to shift into the spotlight and what might need to, take a pause now. And if you want to dive even deeper, feel free to check out the links below. I offer sacred structure audios where I will just go through your astrology and human design and give you some tips on how it will best serve you to organize your schedule and your day so that you feel in energetic alignment and life flows, as well as more in-depth one-on-one coaching. Well, we'll work together one-on-one and go through the whole inventory of everything that's going on, really connect with your soul desires and your priorities, and create a manageable schedule and action plan that feels really good so that you're enjoying your life every day, right? Because that's the whole point. Enjoying your life on the way to whatever the thing is you might want to be manifesting next. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.